Chapter 5. The Only Mother I Had. Archie slowly pulled up into the driveway. Uncle Jacob didn't turn around until we came to a full stop. Then he stood up and gestured empathetically for Archie to back up. "I need room to work here," he explained. "Sorry," Archie said, and he backed up a good 10 feet, and we all got out of the car. Uncle Jacob, his back to us, continued to work removing the flat tire. "Hello, Jacob," Mommy said. He nodded without turning around. "It'll be a while with us," he finally replied, still not looking our way. "Go inside. Sarah's been waiting for you all morning." "Thought you were supposed to be here last night." He groaned as if he had turned the nut on the flat tire. The muscles in his long arms tightened, and the muscles in his neck bulged with effort. The nut loosened and he relaxed again. "It took longer than we expected," Mommy said. Uncle Jacob grunted. Mommy looked at me and then at Archie, who had his lips twisted in disgust. She put her hand up to my shoulder and guided me toward the front door. The house was a Cape Codder, with a windows walk that faced the ocean. The trim on the railings and shuttered was Wedgwood blue, but like the cedar siding, it was faded by the salt air. There were short, narrow cobblestone walkways to the front of the door. On the windows were dainty eggshell white curtains, and on the sills were flower boxes full of tulips and daffodils. The bird feeder dangled from the roof's small porch, and a tiny sparrow fluttered its wings nearby, cautiously waiting for us to pass. Mommy tapped gently on the door. Then after a moment she tapped again, a bit harder. "Just go in," Uncle Jacob called from the driveway. "She won't hear you. She's in the kitchen, I'm sure." Mommy turned the knob and we entered. The small entryway led us to the living room on our right. A massive brick fireplace consumed most of the far wall. There was a bluish-gray throw rug on the hard grove floor. A deep cushioned sofa and an oversized chair besides were the only things that matched. The rest of the furnishings were antiques, which included a well-worn walker, 2 small pine tables at the ends of the sofa, and an old sewing table in the corner, and lamps made of cranberry glass and milk glass. On the mantel were framed photos. Mounted on a dark blue board hanging over its fireplace was a swordfish that looked at least 7 foot long. Its glass eyes seemed to turn towards us as we entered. "Sarah," Mommy called, "we're here." We heard the pan being dropped into the metal sink, and a moment later my Aunt Sarah appeared in the doorway from the kitchen. A tall woman, maybe an inch or so taller than Mommy. She wore a long, flowing, light blue skirt that made her look all legs. Over her skirt, she had a plain white apron, which she wiped her hands. Her blouse had fitted sleeves with frills and pearl buttons closed almost to the top. The collar parted just enough to reveal her very pronounced collarbone and a thin gold chain that held a gold locket. Her chestnut brown hair hung down over her shoulders. Through it were delicate streaks of gray. Aunt Sarah wore no makeup to brighten her pale complexion, and she wore no jewelry but the locket. She might have once been pretty, but her silvery webs in her temples were deep and her eyes looked dull, dark brown. The darkness spread to the puffiness beneath her eyes, too. She had a small nose and high cheekbones with gracefully full lips, but her face was thin, almost gaunt. "Hello, Sarah," Mommy said. "Hello, Haley," Aunt Sarah replied without changing her expression. The way Mommy and Aunt Sarah gazed at each other made my stomach turn. It was as if they were not only looking at each other across the room, but across a time of a great distance. Neither one of them made an attempt to hug or even shake hands. A deep silence lingered for a confusing moment, making me feel as if I were floundering in a world of adult quicksand. What sort of welcome was this? I stood there full of thousands of anxieties, butterflies panicking in my chest. "This is my friend Richard," Mommy said, as she explained Archie's presence first, I suppose. "He was kind enough to drive us here from West Virginia." Aunt Sarah nodded her eyes quickly and went to me with great interest, her face brightening in anticipation. "And this is Melody," Mommy added, putting her hands on my shoulders. Aunt Sarah's gaze was so penetrating I thought she could look right through me. A small smile, almost impossible to notice, formed at the corners of her mouth. "Yes," she said, nodding, as if I was exactly the way she imagined I'd be. "She's about Laura's size and height, only Laura's hair was darker and she never kept it that long," she said, the sadness making her face long and hollow-eyed. "I'm sorry about all that," Mommy said softly. "Yes," Aunt Sarah said, still staring at me. I looked at Mommy. What was she sorry about? Who's Laura? Apparently she knew more than what she admitted about Daddy's family. "I bet you're hungry," Aunt Sarah said to me, and the smile returned to her lips. I smiled back, but my stomach was tied up in so many knots I didn't think I could ever keep food in it. "I've got a chicken roasting. Carrie will be home soon with Mary. They're both very excited about your coming here." She turned to Mommy and Archie. "In the meantime, I've got clams steamed for you." "Oh, good. In the years since I've been here, I've never had them as good as yours, Sarah." "I don't do any more with clams than anyone else around here does," she said modestly. "You scrub them and drop them into a kettle. Just enough water to cover them. No mystery about it." Aunt Sarah said with her voice suddenly harder and sterner. "Maybe it's just clams here," Mommy said. She seemed awkward and uncomfortable under Aunt Sarah's icy glare. "That's for sure," Archie said. Aunt Sarah raised her eyebrows and looked at him as if she just noticed his presence. "Well now, come into the dining room and make yourselves at home," she said. An antique trestle table stretched nearly the whole length of the dining room. It had a captain's chair at the end and 4 straight chairs in a perfect line on each side. Lying at the head of the table was a leather-bound Bible, and there was a small pine table in the corner in the room which held a yellow vase with roses in it. On the wall hung an oil painting, a seascape with a lone sailboat moving toward the horizon. I looked closer and saw what looked like a ray of bright sunshine pouring through the opening in the overcast sky, with a godlike finger in the center of the ray of light. The finger pointed to the lone sailboat. "Please take a seat," Aunt Sarah said. "That's Jacob's chair," she added toward the captain chair at the end of the table where the Bible lay. Obviously no one else was permitted to sit in it. "Everyone like cranberry juice?" "It makes for a great mix with vodka," Archie quipped. "Pardon?" Aunt Sarah said. Mommy gave him a reprimanding look. "What?" He recovered quickly. "Oh, sure we like it, thank you." Aunt Sarah hurried back to the kitchen. "Who's Laura, Mommy?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me about her?" "It's too sad," Mommy whispered and brought her finger to her lips. "Not now, honey." Aunt Sarah reappeared carrying a pitcher filled with cranberry juice and a tray with 3 tall glasses. Each had 2 ice cubes. She gave us a glass and started to reach for the pitcher. "Let me pour that," Archie volunteered. Aunt Sarah nodded at him. She gazed at me again, drinking me in for a long moment, her eyes twinkling with pleasure and approval. It made me feel uncomfortable to be scrutinized so closely. I looked away. "Do you like clams, dear?" she asked. "I guess so," I said. "I don't remember eating them." "She loves them," Mommy said quickly. "Laura loved them too," Aunt Sarah said. She sighed. "I'll go get them." She returned to the kitchen. "Mommy," I said, pleading for information. "Just wait, Melody. Let everyone get to know everyone before you start asking all your questions." She looked at Archie. "She's always full of questions." "You don't have to tell me." He gulped down some of the cranberry juice. "Hey, this is good." "Cranberries are a big thing here," Mommy said. "I'd like a penny for everyone I harvest. I'd be rich." "You're gonna be rich," Archie promised. Mommy's smile warmed as she turned towards me. Isn't this a nice house, honey? There's a beach right behind the dock, too. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. I forgot how refreshing the ocean air could be, she said, which I thought was funny. She had never enjoyed our trips to the ocean as much as Daddy had. Yeah, it sure seems to clean out the coal dust in your lungs, Archie said. Aunt Sarah brought in a pretty blue and white china soup bowl and set them in front of us. She brought in the kettle of clams and a bowl of melted butter. Please help yourself, she said. Archie dipped his hand into the kettle quickly and brought out a clam. He planked the meat into his thumb and forefinger and dipped it in the butter and sucked it down quickly. Great, he said. Use your fork, Mommy instructed as quietly as she could. What? Oh, sure. He took a handful of clams out of the kettle and dropped them in his bowl, this time digging it in with his fork. Aunt Sarah smiled quickly, then looked as if she were lost at what to do next. Are you having any, Sarah? Mommy asked. No, I'm fine. Go on, you eat, Hallie. She looked at me again, stabbing me with her penetrating gaze. I nervously reached into the kettle and scooped a few clams. I put them into my bowl and picked out the meat with my fork. Aunt Sarah watched my every move, approving with a little nod with every gesture I made. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I looked at Mommy. She didn't seem to notice or care about the way Aunt Sarah was looking at me. These clams are wonderful, as I remember. It's been a long time. Yes, Aunt Sarah said after a deep sigh, and she finally sat back in her chair. Was it a hard trip? Nah, Archie said. Some rain along the way was all. We had an unusually cold winter this year, Aunt Sarah said. She looked around. The house never seemed to warm up. How do you heat it? Archie asked. Fireplace and kerosene stoves. It's an old house, but we've been here ever since. Ever since what? Archie asked. Ever since Jacob and I got married, she said. She looked at Mommy a moment. You haven't changed all that much, Hallie. You're still so pretty. Thank you, Sarah. Melody has inherited your best features, Aunt Sarah added, gazing at me again. I couldn't help blushing. Yes, Mommy said, everyone says so. Carrie, he takes after Jacob, and May looks more like my side of the family. Laura was special, Aunt Sarah added softly. Her eyes grew glassy, and her gaze grew far away. Then suddenly, as if realizing we were there, she turned to me again and smiled. Are you a good student? Yes, ma'am. She's a very good student, Mommy said. All A's. Just like Laura, Aunt Sarah said. She shook her head. Carrie isn't like his twin sister was. He gets by, but he's not much for being shut up in the classroom. He's more like Jacob, she said. Give him something to do outside and he'll be happy, no matter how cold or how much it's raining. When the Logan men get busy in the world, they wouldn't know it. I know, Mommy said. Aunt Sarah sighed again so deeply that I thought she might shatter like a thin china before our eyes. I'm sorry about Chester. Might as well tell you that before Jacob comes in. He won't want me speaking about him. I looked at Mommy. Why wouldn't Daddy's brother permit anyone to speak about him now, even after he was dead? Mommy nodded, as if she had no trouble understanding. So how old is Carrie now? She asked, deliberately changing the topic. He's 16. May was 10 last month. I bet she's a good student, Mommy said, struggling for conversation. Aunt Sarah raised her eyebrows. Yes, she goes to a special school, you know. Carrie sees that she gets there all right and home all right. He's devoted to her. I think more so since Laura's been gone, she said. Again, I looked at Mommy. She shifted her eyes away. You don't like clams, dear? Aunt Sarah asked me, poised to be disappointed. What? Oh, yes, I said and dug my fork into another. How are Samuel and Olivia? Mommy asked Aunt Sarah. I know those two were my grandparents, so I stopped eating again to listen. They both suffer from arthritis, and then, otherwise they're well. I told them you were coming, she said as almost an afterthought. Oh? Aunt Sarah said nothing more about it. The topic disappeared as quickly as it popped like a soap bubble. And neither Mommy nor Aunt Sarah seemed unhappy about that. I wanted to know more. They hadn't seen me. Were they curious about me as I was about them? The door opened and closed. Uncle Jacob appeared with a rag in his hands. The shape of his chin and mouth resembled Daddy's, but he had a longer, sharper nose and longer ears. His eyes were more hazel than green. Clams are sweeter this year, he said. They're great, Archie said. Uncle Jacob finally considered him. This is my friend Richard, Jacob. He drove us here. Uncle Jacob just nodded and looked at me. She's not as tall as I thought she might be, he said. The way he made me up feel as if I failed in growing properly. Melody, this is your Uncle Jacob, Mommy said with her eyes on him. Hello, I said, my voice cracking. He didn't smile. He wiped his hands and stared at me. Plenty of time for all of us to meet later, he declared. I gotta do some work on the boat right now. Sarah, send Carrie down as soon as he gets home. He left through the rear of the house. It's very important to look after the boat, Aunt Sarah explained with another quick smile. Well, she continued, I imagine you are going to be staying the night, Hallie. No, Mommy said quickly, we have a tight schedule. Oh? Why had we come so far if we're going to leave so quickly, I wondered. Mommy had talked about showing me Providencetown before I could ask. We heard the front door open again. That should be Carrie and May, Aunt Sarah said. A few moments later, my cousins appeared in the dining room doorway. Carrie was tall and did indeed take after his father. He had the same dark complexion as Uncle Jacob, only he had a more sensitive face and much softer features. He had green eyes like Daddy's, but his hair was darker, almost as coal as black. His emerald eyes seemed brighter. He wore his hair rather long, to his shoulders. He was dressed in jeans and a dark blue shirt with his sleeves rolled up at his elbows. Beside him, clinging to his hand, was my cousin May. She was small and bird-like for 10, diminutive except for her round, very bright hazel eyes. Her hair, the same chestnut shade as Aunt Sarah's, was cut short in a pixie style. She wore a light blue dress with embroidered bodice and saddle shoes. Her feet were small. They made her look like a doll. She smiled, but Carrie kept a very serious look on his face, his gaze quickly moving from Archie to Mommy to me. When he fixed his eyes on me, I thought his look softened. Well now, say hello to everyone, Aunt Sarah said. This is your Aunt Haley and her friend Richard and your cousin Melanie. Carrie immediately turned to May and began to move his hands. She watched him and nodded when he stopped, and then she turned to us and said, hello. She stretched the syllables so that it sounded mechanical. I couldn't help my look of surprise, but I saw it displeased Carrie. Yes, she's deaf, my cousin said sharply to me. Well, ain't that a shame, Archie muttered. Carrie threw him an angry look that if it were a knife, it would have cut Archie's head off. How was school, May? Aunt Sarah asked her, signing as she spoke. May proudly held up her paper with a bright gold star on the top. She got 100 on the spelling test, Carrie boasted. That's nice, dear, Aunt Sarah said. She seemed a bit more uncomfortable with the hand movements than her son was. Your father wants you to go right down to the dock, Carrie, she said. He nodded. You can visit with everyone at dinner. Carrie turned immediately and signed something to May. She nodded and looked at me. He glanced at me once more before heading out back. Go up and change your clothes, dear, Aunt Sarah signed to May. The young girl nodded and signed something back before hurrying off. Carrie takes such good care of her, Aunt Sarah remarked with a sigh. I didn't know she was deaf, Mommy said softly. I don't think Chester knew either. Yes, she was born deaf. Seems like that shouldn't have been a burden for us. But then there was Laura. A heavy pail fell over the table. Archie couldn't stand it. Why don't we go up to the town and see the sights before dinner, Haley? Mommy nodded. Can we take May along? I asked Aunt Sarah. Oh, I don't think we should, Mommy said quickly. We're still strangers to her. Your mother's right, dear. It's a little soon, Aunt Sarah said. She got up and started to clear the table. Let me help you, Aunt Sarah, I said. She turned to me with surprise. Why, thank you, dear, but I can manage fine. Why don't you go up and get your things, and I'll show you your room now. My room? Aunt Sarah smiled and went into the kitchen. I turned to Mommy. My room? What's wrong with her, Mommy? Didn't you say we weren't staying the night? Let's go outside, Melody, Mommy said in a whisper. I followed her and Archie out. He headed for the trunk of the car. Let me talk to her first, Richard, Mommy told him. He paused and shrugged, and then he dug a cigarette out of his pocket and leaned against the car. What's going on, Mommy? Nothing terrible, she replied quickly. Isn't it pretty here? Look at the view of the ocean you get from the house, and it's not too far from town, is it? Mommy, what's happening? I demanded. Now just listen carefully, Melody, and don't go into a tantrum. She glanced over at Archie. He was looking at his watch. Let's take a little walk by ourselves, Mommy suggested. She started away and I followed, but I was stretched tight like a wire inside, so taut that I thought I might snap in two. It really wasn't right for the family to be separated so long, Mommy began. It wasn't right for you never to meet your cousins until now, and it certainly wasn't right for you to have never met your grandparents, she recited. It sounded like something that she'd memorized. So, I thought that's why you wanted to come here, I said. It was. I mean, it is. I mean, yes. She took a deep breath and pressed her lips together. Tears came to her eyes. What's wrong, Mommy? What is it? Oh, Melody, you know that I love you and that I'll always love you. I know that, Mommy. You know that even though I love you, I always thought it was a mistake for me to have a child so early in my life. I want to warn you about that, she said sternly. Don't have children until you're at least 35. 35? Yes, and if you're smart, you'll remember that. Anyway, you know that I've tried to be a good mother, and that I'm not the best mother. I'm not complaining, Mommy, I said. There were burning tears coming to my eyes now, too. We'll be all right. Oh, I know we will, honey. But first I have to do things. I have to try, don't I? You wouldn't want me to feel like I was tied down if I had the chance. You wouldn't want me frustrated and shut up in another place like Sewell, would you? Because I'm not happy, Melody. And I can't make you happy, can I? Can I? She repeated. No, I said. I tried to make my breath deep. My lungs felt like ice had entered and shriveled up in a constricting pain. Good. So you understand that I've got to go places and meet people and do auditions and learn things, she said. You already told me all this, Mommy. I know. But, well, it's not the kind of life I can put you through right now. You're still in school and you need stability. You need friends and boyfriends and to go to parties and... So, why can't I do that wherever we are, Mommy? Because I'm not going to be any place for a while, maybe a long while. I'll have to travel around. If I get any opportunity, I'll have to pick up and go. You can't turn down great opportunities, not at my age, she emphasized. And what would life be like under that circumstance for you, huh? But Mommy, listen, honey, imagine just having some new friends or starting out with a new boyfriend and me coming home and saying, we're leaving tomorrow. You know how hard that would be? How terrible for you it would feel? How would you get through that? And then having to sleep in cheap motels and eat on the road, everything. After a while, you would just grow to hate me, and I would hate myself. And then I wouldn't try to become someone, she explained. We would both be unhappy. She smiled. I don't want you to be unhappy, honey. What are we going to do, Mommy? I asked and held my breath. Well, now here's where everything worked out for us. After your daddy died, I called Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah and told them, of course, and I explained what was going on with my life. It was Aunt Sarah who suggested it. Suggested what, Mommy? Suggested that you stay here a while I'm making the career change, she said. She's very happy to have you, and this is a wonderful place to live. You'll make so many new interesting friends, I'm sure. You can't just leave me here, I shook my head. Just for a while, honey. I'll call constantly, and I'll come back as soon as I'm established someplace. But for now, I'm going to go off with Archie, and I know you're not crazy about traveling with us. You mean Richard? I said dryly. And I know he's not happy about having me travel with you. It's not because of Richard. Are you going to marry him, Mommy? Of course not, she said, but not with a great deal of firmness. Anyway, she said, gesturing toward the house, this will be a fine time for you for a while. You'll be staying with family. I don't want to stay here, Mommy. I don't want to be away from you, I moaned. Oh, you won't be. Not for long anyway, I promise. She stroked my hair and smiled and kissed my forehead. I just need this chance, honey, and I can't go off and getting worried about you too. It wouldn't be fair to you. I'd neglect you even worse than I have in the past. And you're so very smart. You understand, don't you? I have no fear that you'll do well here too. Everyone likes you, Melanie. I lowered my head slowly like a flag of defeat and stared at my feet. A southern breeze blew, caressing my cheek and making the strands of my hair dance around my face. I heard the cry of nearby terns and the roar of the ocean. Daddy was the glue that held our little family together. Now that he was gone, we were coming apart. I'd rather have stayed at home with Papa George and Grandma Arlene, Mommy. I know, I thought of that, but Papa George is a sick man. Grandma Arlene can't be responsible for a young girl, too. It wouldn't be fair to dump you on her, honey. I looked up sharply. So instead, you dump me here? No, Melody, living with your own family for a while isn't the same as dumping you someplace, is it? These people, I don't know them, Mommy, and they don't know me. An even better reason for you to stay with them, Melody. You should get to know them, right? Am I right about that? She waited for the answer she wanted. I don't know, maybe. But why don't we ever speak to them before? Why was Daddy so upset with them? Because they didn't want him to marry me, Melody. I told you, they looked down on me because I was an orphan. Adopted. I wasn't one of the blue bloods. And your grandparents and your father's parents wanted him to marry someone else. Someone they had chosen. He refused. Chester Logan fell in love with me, and we got married. They wouldn't talk to him, and he wouldn't talk to them. Now everyone realizes how foolish they were, I'm sure. They want to make it up to your father, but it's too late for that. The only way they can make up for the bitterness and unpleasantness is to take care of you. That's why they were so anxious to do it and why I agreed. I only wish you'd see the logic in it and let me leave with a happy heart. Because if you feel happy, I'll be able to concentrate on my new career and I'll be able to do things faster for us, Melody, she added. Where are you going, Mommy? You don't even have a specific plan. Sure I do. I'm going to be a model and an actress, she said firmly. Then she laughed and spun on her heels. Did you ever see anyone that's more qualified, anyone prettier? No, Mommy. Wouldn't it be wonderful seeing me in magazines or movies? Can you imagine telling your friends that that's your mother? She laughed and twirled her hair. She was beautiful. Maybe she would become a model and be in magazines. If I went into a tantrum and stopped her from going without me, she would blame me for failing, I thought. I didn't want Mommy to hate me. I looked back at the house. Archie paced behind the car impatiently. At least I wouldn't have to be with him any longer. I was the eternal cockeyed optimist, always looking for the rainbow after a sorrowful storm. Well, Mommy said, will you stay with the family a while, will you, Melanie? If that's what you want me to do, Mommy, I said in a tired, defeated voice. She clapped her hands together. "Oh, thank you, honey, thank you. Thank you for giving me my chance. I won't let you down, I promise, honey." I nodded and took a deep breath. When I looked at the house again, I saw May come out and look our way. She had a ball and a paddle and began to play with them, her eyes trained on me and Mommy. "What happened to Laura, Mommy?" "She went sailing one day with a boy that got caught in a storm. She drowned in the ocean." Mommy nodded. "We didn't find out about it until a few months afterwards. Daddy decided to call your uncle then, but he still wouldn't speak to Chester. This house has seen a lot of sadness just like ours, but they'll be lucky for a while," Mama added. I looked up at her. "Why?" "They'll have you," she said. She put her arm around me and started back toward the driveway. Archie looked up expectantly at Mommy and nodded, and then he hurried to the trunk to upload my bags. "What about the rest of my things, Mommy? I don't have much." "I'll get in touch with Arlene and see about having them shipped here. Don't worry," she said. May was still watching us with great curiosity. Mommy noticed the girl. "Hello, honey." May smiled, but turned to me quickly. Then she thrust her hand at mine and seized my fingers tightly, tugging me to go someplace with her. "Go on, honey," Mama said. "Richard and I will see to your things." But May pulled me again. I let her lead me away. She quickened her pace and reached in the sand that I was running alongside her. "Where are we going?" I cried, for a moment forgetting her deafness. When we headed toward the dock and the ocean. First, we had to climb the top of a dune covered with scrub pine. The sand gave way beneath my feet. It was hard to run in the dunes, and before long I felt my calf muscles ache. Little May didn't seem to have the least bit of difficulty. She was as light as air and remained ahead of me on the sandy hill. When we reached it, I paused to look at the vast ocean. In the distance, 2 fishing boats trolled on the shore further out. A sailboat gracefully glided over the waves, its white sail fluttering. Off to my right, there were shacks along the dunes. Above us, a flock of Canadian geese flew north in a formation against the deep blue sky, dappled with smoke blue puffs of clouds. The sight was invigorating, and the fresh sea air seemed to wash the sadness from my heart. This, I thought, was once my father's playground, and now for a while at least it would be mine. May tugged on my hand and pointed toward the dock. "Carrie," she said, "come on." I laughed and followed her down the dune. We continued with my chest heaving, and finally we slowed to the walk when we reached the dock. My uncle's lobster boat bobbed gently in the water. It was white and gray, and although it looked old, it looked very clean and well kept. The boat was named Laura. The name had been recently painted on its side. At first we saw no one, but then Carrie came out of the cabin with a pail and brush in his hands. He had his shirt off, and he didn't see us immediately. May called up to him, "Carrie." What he saw standing on the dock, he immediately put down his pail and brush so that he could sign May. Whatever was he telling her? He was telling her empathetically. He looked angry, too. "Is anything wrong?" I asked. The falling sun gleamed off his shiny brown skin. He looked muscular and hard and wore a silver necklace that I hadn't noticed before. "She knows she can't come down here by herself," he said. "She's not by herself, she's with me," I replied. "You're a land lover," he snapped. "It's the same as if she was by herself." He signed again, and May turned and started back toward the house. I stared up at Carrie. "She only wanted to show me," I said. "She knows better. Take her home," he ordered, and picked up the pail and brush, turning his back to me, and returned to what he'd been doing. I fumed for a moment, then hurried to catch up with May, who was walking much more slowly with her head down. I grabbed her hand and then caught up with her, and she smiled. It's all right, I said. She tilted her head and her beautiful hazel eyes bejeweled with her flecks of blue and green and gold and soft brown. Your brother shouldn't have gotten so nasty, I added, but she looked confused and I felt frustrated. I was speaking loud as if that mattered. It made me feel stupid, and I glanced back once and saw Carrie looking after us. Behind him, the sky was turning dusky lavender. If it's so dangerous, I muttered, why does he live here? I pounded my feet into the sand and clung to May's hand as we returned to the house. When we arrived, I found Mommy and Archie waiting by the car. May released my hand and ran into the house. Where did you go, honey? Mommy asked. Just for a walk to the dock to see the lobster boat, but that apparently is off limits for May, I said. Carrie isn't very nice. Oh, I'm sure it's just because you two don't know each other, Mommy said. Haley, Archie said, raising his eyebrows. Honey, Mommy said, stepping close so she could take my hand. Archie and I think we should start out now so we can get back down to Boston. He's got someone for me to meet there tonight. You're leaving now? But what about dinner? We're just going to grab something on the highway, she said. Didn't you want to look at the town and... Oh, I know this town, she said, laughing. Don't forget how long I lived here. But I looked at the house and then back toward the ocean. Don't you want to talk to Uncle Jacob? I think he'll be happy avoiding it right now, she said. We put your things in your room. It's a very nice room, honey, nicer than what you had in the trailer. The window looks out at the ocean. Aunt Sarah's going to see to it that you get enrolled in school, and we'll get your records from West Virginia easily enough. I've already signed the papers that I need to sign and gave them to Aunt Sarah as authority, Mommy added. When? I asked, astounded at how much she had done already. Just now. Aunt Sarah found out that we needed it done. She's very excited about having you. Archie got in the car and started the engine. My heart began to beat wildly in a jungle drum. Mommy. Now don't make this any harder than it has to be, honey. I'll be calling you every few days to tell you where I am and what I'm doing. And before you know it, I'll be back for you. Time ticks, Archie called. Can you stay a little longer, I pleaded, my heart doing flip-flops. A little longer isn't going to make any difference to you. But it'll make a lot of difference to us because we have to drive so far, honey, please. She hugged me and I kept my arms at my side, and then she kissed me quickly on the forehead. I don't have to tell you to be a good girl. I know you will be. See you soon, she added and turned to the car. Mommy. I ran to hug her tightly, clinging to her, clinging to the only life I had known, clinging to the memories of our laughter and tears. Maybe she wasn't the best of all mothers, but she was the only mother I had. And there were nice times too. There were picnics and dinners and Christmas and birthdays. And all I could remember now was being a little girl and clinging to her and walking through the streets of Sewell. Everyone looked at us. Mommy was so beautiful and I was so proud. Melody, she whispered, please, honey. I let her go and backed away. She smiled. I'll call you soon. She walked quickly around the car to get in. Archie smiled at me. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, kid, he said and winked. There's not much you wouldn't do, I replied. He laughed. Gonna miss you, princess. I got no one to be my gopher. He laughed and backed the car out of the driveway. I took a step forward. Mommy turned as they pulled away, waving. Another picture to press down into my memory. I watched the car as it disappeared down the street, and I stood there, still in disbelief. Then I heard the door open behind me, and I turned to see Aunt Sarah nervously wiping her hands on her apron. Laura always liked to help set the table. Would you like to help? I nodded and smiled. I thought so. She went back inside and I lowered my head and followed. I felt like someone who had been cast off a boat. I was searching desperately for a life-saving raft.